Welcome to the Imperfect Parent Podcast, Gospel Hope for Imperfect Parents. I'm Brendan Willis, the pastor at Sovereign Grace Church in Wahroonga, and I'm here with Dave Taylor, lead pastor, and Emma, his lovely wife. And today we're planning on having our conversation that's all about dealing with failure.
There's lots of data for this week.
We picked an uplifting topic to get us going.
This will cheer them up on their way to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to talk about failure. But we do believe there's a lot of gospel hope for imperfect parents that are aware of their failures. And so I just wanted to get us thinking to begin with about just this sense that in our culture there's this kind of rising culture of anxiety. Do you guys feel that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. We were just chatting about that recently, Emma and I. I think our generation was definitely anxious about some things. My observation would be the next generation is anxious about a lot of things. There is a lot of anxiety, and particularly relating to children, actually, about parenting and how they deal with that and all the different moving parts and overwhelmed with that. But then actually, ironically, growing anxiety, but growing probably won't talk about it. I'll just keep it to myself.
How about for you, Emma? Do you kind of sense that feeling that we're all just a bit more anxious these days?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think anxiety is definitely on the rise. But I think that it is probably something people are, which I suppose I hope is not going to contradict what you're just saying. I think it's something people are a bit more willing to talk about. You mean
that totally contradicts everything.
The feeling of anxiety.
That's encouraging. Well, welcome to my marriage, guys. The way we work.
We really are. This is really the imperfect
the fount of
podcast.
all knowledge.
Well,
as Dave said, I completely disagree with it.
I think it's more acceptable to talk about now.
Yeah.
That's what I was meaning.
Absolutely.
So I think it's more, whereas...
Now, what I was referring to was more, I think people get anxious about things and then might not talk about the things that they're anxious about and how to deal with them. But I'll talk about that I'm anxious.
I agree with you on that, because people think they're on their own in those struggles. So they don't want to...
Did we record that? Or should I agree with you? That was just nice.
Yes. No, I do agree with that. I think anxiety in general is more talked about, but I think there's things that we can struggle with that we think we're the only ones in, so we don't like to talk about it. Yeah.
Right.
So we're on the same page. Perfect.
That's super helpful, though, because I think it's a really important distinction. On the one level, we're a lot more comfortable talking about mental health.
Yes,
we're
definitely.
very aware, which is a blessing that we're aware that, just like our bodies can be broken, our minds can be broken, and that we feel comfortable 100%. Talking about that.
Yeah.
But maybe a distancing of talking about, but what are the things that specifically we're anxious about and worried about? Yeah. And I don't know, we're in the culture of, we're in the season of being, very new parents. Our oldest isn't even 5 yet. And I feel like a lot of parents that I talk to are very anxious about their kids and about parenting. Am I doing a good job?
Yeah.
Am I making a meal of it?
Mum guilt's a real thing. I'm sure dad guilt is too, huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think sometimes as well people might even be blind to how anxious they are? So they're behaving anxious, but then if you ask them, are you anxious? They're not anxious, but you're like, well, you seem very nervous about letting your kids out.
Or even there's so many things that I'm anxious about, I can't even put a finger on which one. Yeah. The amount of times I had a conversation with someone, they go, I'm anxious, Brendan, but I don't even know anymore what specifically. It's just a feeling that I'm just on edge all the time, and I think that's a real thing, really common.
Well, even expression of anger, sometimes digging beneath that actually reveals anger as a result of some underlying fears.
Yeah,
we can't.
Absolutely.
But thank you for clarifying that, Brendan, because I thought it was going to turn into a marriage conflict podcast rather than a...
No, it's good.
We've got a separate podcast.
We've got a separate
marriage
conflict.
That's next year.
That's right. Stay tuned, guys. You made it this far. Well done.
There's another podcast.
I actually did. Speaking of fears in parenting, I stumbled across this video of the British comedian John Oliver. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's very funny. A little bit crude, but he had this comedy routine on his show, the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and he makes the comment that there's actually an objective hierarchy of fears, in parenting, and he says there's 5. The first one is losing one of your children. Obviously, that would be terrible.
Yeah, done that.
The second is
we try not to.
Obviously no parent wants that to happen. The second is something terrible happening to one of your kids. Obviously we don't want that to happen. The third is losing them, but not in a dead way, but in the old, I can't find them. And then you have to decide, am I going to look for them on my own, or I'm going to let someone know immediately that they're missing? But if something really is wrong, I'm going to need help. But if they're just kind of around looking for Lego sets, you don't want to announce it to Target employees that you're actually like a negligent parent who's misplaced your child.
Yeah.
The fourth one, he says, is your children hating you for exactly the person you are. So not because they're mistaken, but because it's just you and they really don't like you.
Ouch.
And which I think all of us can go like, oh my goodness, that would be horrible. And then the fifth one, he says, which I found hilarious, is your child gets really good at swimming. Because that means you have to take them to the pool at 5 a.m. every other morning for the next 10 years.
Yes. Horrendous.
But getting to the point that I think, there are lots of things that we tend to worry about and we can be fearful about as parents. How about for you guys? What are some of the sort of fears you guys have wrestled with in parenting?
Oh, yes. Fears... Like, I actually remember one of the times I was most fearful about our kids was actually when they were learning to drive. Well, I say learning to drive. I didn't mind the learning so much because somebody's with them. You hope somebody's responsible.
I was fearful for my life when they were
You refused to get in the car with them.
Once for each one, and I got so fearful I'm never doing that again.
So, but once they get their P's and they're out on that road by themselves.
And there's like no one in your family right now that has the red P's, is there? I couldn't possibly think of anyone at all.
That's right,
just someone.
We've had 3 P platers now. So 3 down, 2 to go. So...
Yeah. And the 2 to go, we're not training them.
We've got a bit of time. We've got older kids that can train them now.
Good.
So, but I think just that them going out on their own, driving on the roads. Like, I hope for the most part our kids are responsible drivers, but accidents happen, and sometimes other people do stupid things. Sometimes they probably do stupid things too.
Oh, I can remember.
But I do remember being fearful about that, and I think also just going on the whole fostering journey. I think with our own biological kids, obviously being very much involved given their ages. I've definitely had to battle fears of, gosh, are we going to screw up our own kids as a result of trying to help other kids?
Wow.
So, definitely I can relate to.
I would be similar. I don't tend to worry about or get fearful about health or even their faith and friendships and things like that. Those things don't make me as nervous. I can be more fearful of making poor decisions that could have big ramifications. So obviously moving to Australia was a big one. You're like, okay, we are going to take them functionally. They're going to grow up without grandparents, any aunties and uncles. It's just going to be us. What effect will that have on them?
Wow.
So making decisions, which school we put them in, that's it was a big decision at the time because it's going to dictate probably who their friends are and there's a lot of ramifications for those things. So fear sometimes around those I've wrestled with in parenting.
Yeah, and I think some friendships at different points. I think of particularly some of our girls, some friendships they've chosen when they hit those ages where you can't control it quite as much. You can control what they do outside of school, but you can't control so much what they do inside of school. But
it is interesting. I think sometimes when our kids are small, we can think, if only once they can get older, I think I'll be less fearful. No, you'll be more fearful.
Yes.
Because they start to have their own minds, their own decisions. You can't control everything they do at all.
I thought this was supposed to be an encouraging podcast.
We'll get there eventually. But you're so true. Like what you're saying is exactly right.
Yeah.
Even I was listening to the CCF podcast, and they were describing how there's 2 phases of parenting. The first, when you've got little ones like we do, is the anger phase, where they should be under your authority and they're refusing to be, and you're angry because they're just not obeying. But then as they get older, you move into the phase, exactly what you're saying, they call it the anxiety phase, where you're losing control of them and you worry then about what are they going to do, what's going to happen to them, how is this going to play out, and how you have to really trust God with that.
Yeah.
So absolutely right, and you realise that within those 2 phrases that the second half is almost a bit of harvest time as well. So if you, there could be a fear of, oh my gosh, did we not put enough in the early years because now this isn't great fruit that's coming out. That can cause anxiety as well, for sure.
There's so many things we can be worried about as parents. I was just thinking about this a bit. Obviously, in the lead up to this podcast, I think fears of your kid missing out on things, I think, is massive. Missing out on schooling or maybe missing out on sports or maybe missing out on financially, like you're not going to set them up for the future, something like that. I think there's fears around harming our kids, which is one we want to press into a bit, like causing psychological harm to them. Could I just like completely stuff them up for the rest of their life by the way I act? And
Definitely had that one at times too.
Well, I also think all of us carry like hurts and scars from things that have happened to us in the past, and for some people that might relate to their parents as well, and this desire not for history to repeat itself, and like a fear that it will. You know, you see the things that your parents used to say, you saying to your kids, even though you swore you'd never say it.
Yes.
You know, and then you go, oh no,
I will never say that.
What's going to happen? What's going to happen? You can get fearful around it.
Yeah.
I think fears around their faith and the future.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think people can be fearful about that, their kids not walking with Christ. Fears around kids' friendships, friendships with others, friendships with yourself as your parent. Will they, you know, that fourth point that John Oliver talks about, will they just not like you? They know you. Yes. There's no mistakes there, but they just don't like you. You know, they hate you.
Yeah.
And then, you know, fears around their decisions and welfare. There's so many things.
That's exactly right.
We can
I
be
think that's
fearful
exactly right. I think as well, just for any listeners that have had traumatic things happen in their lives, they can often bring their fears into their parenting. So they're incredibly fearful for their kids, but actually sometimes unaware that that's because you had some things happen to you.
Yes.
And therefore now we're going to wrap them up in cotton wool.
Yes.
And that can have some challenges too, but it's fears. It's fear driven.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this desire to try and somehow save my kids from the road ahead in life, that I could somehow stop them from facing
I will
those same
ensure they
hardships.
never get hurt.
Yeah.
Fearful that they might be. Oh.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. Well, today we're particularly interested in this idea of how the potential for us, I guess, as parents to cause, you hear this word, irreparable damage.
Yes.
To damage our kids in a way that can't be fixed, basically. And how this kind of idea can generate a lot of fear that can really dominate our parenting. And so what I want to do is play a video from a very famous psychologist called Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's a clinical psychologist. She's got over 2.5 million followers on Instagram. And so we're just going to listen to about a 30-second clip from a TEDx talk she did that's entitled "The Single Most Important Parenting Strategy." And so we're going to listen to this clip just to get a feel for some of the things that people will be hearing out there. And then we're going to talk about it at the end. So listen to this.
And while self-blame works for us in childhood, we all know it works against us in adulthood. Something's wrong with me. I make bad things happen. I'm unlovable. These are the core fears of so many adults. But really, we see here, they are actually the childhood stories we wrote when we were left alone following distressing events that went unrepaired. Plus, adults with self-blame are vulnerable to depression, anxiety, deep feelings of worthlessness, none of which we want for our kids.
That's a nice little clip from Dr. Becky Kennedy there. What do you guys make of this idea of parenting causing psychological harm to our kids later in life?
I'm going to let you answer that one first.
Oh, I was looking at you. You're looking at me.
I know, but I spoke quicker to put it back on you.
Because I think it's real. Like, we can see it.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think it's one of these. It's one of these things that's probably typically yes and no.
Yeah.
You know, can we cause psychological harm to our kids later in life? Well, yeah. There are things that I'm sure we can do, and without any doubt, that can cause harm and will cause harm at different times. But is that irreparable? No. And is everything we're doing that they don't like going to necessarily cause them harm long term? No. Some things, you know, I was thinking about even the passage that Austin's got coming up, you know, that the Lord disciplines those he loves. Well, discipline is often hurtful. It hurts me. Yep. So does that mean God hates me, or I shouldn't do that because now I don't love myself? No, it's an expression of his love.
In fact, the passage in Hebrews 12 that you're referring to says no discipline at the time feels pleasant, but rather painful.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So the very nature of discipline is that it's painful. often it's unpleasant, but it yields a beautiful harvest in the end.
Yeah.
But I guess you guys have experienced some of the realities of what I guess Dr. Becky's talking about there, in terms of the effect that, say being in an abusive or genuinely negligent home can cause, I guess, in the foster parenting journey that you guys have been on. So you guys would have a real sense of how real that is.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when children have been through trauma, great trauma, it definitely becomes very difficult for them. So I think particularly when they're very young, if some very difficult things happen to them, it's going to be challenging. That they are going to face some psychological realities potentially for many years. But does that mean that they can't find Christ, that they can't find love, that they can't find acceptance, that they can't grow up as a Christian, they can't move on as an adult? Well, no, the Lord is bigger than all those things, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to flag a future episode we're hoping to do in the future, we actually have our own kind of almost Dr. Kate Eastman, who's a trauma specialist. So I'd love to do a future episode. This big shout out to you, Dr. Kate, almost Dr. Kate.
Can we call her Dr. Kate?
We should start calling her.
Because Dr. Phil, he made it big.
Dr. Kate.
Dr. Kate.
She's currently on her way to the US, or in the US at the moment, doing a presentation of her research for some peers. So big shout out to Kate. We're big Kate fans. And so hopefully in the future we'll have an opportunity to learn some more from her on this topic. But I guess what I'm hearing you say in some ways is that we can cause harm, but it's not the end of people's story.
Yes.
In fact, would you go? I want to almost go so far to say I think causing harm to our kids is inevitable. I don't think in a broken world with us as sinners we can avoid it. I mean, what would your take be on that, Dave?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. I think we, it's such a multifaceted question that I feel like you'd come at it from 100 different ways. I think you are inevitably, unless you can actually be Christ to your child and walk in untouchable wisdom the whole of the time, which none of us can do, you are going to say things and do things that are sinful and that will cause harm, that will cause difficulty. In the same way in a marriage you do that. You do that in friendships. You say things or you do things that cause hurt to others. Does that mean it's irreparable? Well, no. That's what grace is all about. That's what the gospel is all about. That God in his grace can repair things. Now, as a parent, does that mean we want to be living a lifestyle? There are certain things I think we can do. So things that I've learned over the years, or watched actually, people do, is if you're going to live as a parent just as a hypocrite for like years, decades, that's going to be problematic. That's going to be really difficult because your kids are going to hate that. And obviously, if you're abusive, it's abhorrent. It's going to have profound effects and should be punished. Should be be held to order for those things. I think, but they're the big ones. Sort of hypocrisy, abuse of any form, unrepentance. So you're living sinfully towards your kids, but you're pretending that you're great all the time. That's going to do some. They're the ones that do the most damage. A lot of other things in terms of I wish we hadn't chosen that school for the kids, but it's changed. But they've been there 3 years. I hope it doesn't do irreparable damage.
Yes.
No, it probably won't do irreparable damage. That's just part of their story and part of the path that the Lord's had them on, and He's faithful and He's good. And so sometimes I think, Brendan, that we're loaded within the question, we can think that psychological harm is just very, very easily done, and I would actually say it's probably quite hard to do. They make it sound as if you do anything wrong, that's it, you're going to ruin them. Well, that's just not actually the case.
Right. We can be fearful of causing any pain.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's part of our culture's lost that sense that pain has a purpose. That pain is used by God to actually strengthen us, that hardships are character building, and that it's in kind of the through the hardships of life as we persevere that we come out the other end stronger and wiser and better equipped. I think we've lost that, and so there's this sense of we don't want any hardships to befall our kids, and somehow mitigate against or block any hardships to protect them for the future, not realizing that actually life is hard. There are challenges we can't avoid it, but God will use them for redemptive purposes. And I wonder if so much of the advice for parenting out there at the moment is all actually, at the end of the day, then about technique. How can you refine your technique to just have the maximum beneficial impact on your kids, to somehow master the art of parenting such that they'll turn out. And it's void of the reality we believe, which is that there's actually, because of the finished work of Jesus, is the Holy Spirit present with us, that there's grace at work as he transforms us in our midst as parents, and that's really the hope for us as parents, why we don't need to be fearful of irreparable damage. It's because the gospel says God makes all things new in their time through the grace of our Lord Jesus. He can rescue our kids to know Christ, and he can transform them to be like him.
And surely if we are ourselves as parents seeking to love Jesus with all our heart, mind, and strength, so that's the heart behind what we're doing. We're still going to make mistakes, without a shadow of a doubt. But the heart is good. The heart is that we're trying our best.
Yes.
And we know we're going to fail at different times. Yes. We have to believe then that there will be grace for us and grace for our children.
Yes.
As I look back on our lives, for Emma and I, and certainly for me, but I know it's true for you as well, some of the best parenting moments we've had has not been actually pointing the kids to what we need to do in this situation. It's actually been able to be coming back to the kids in terms of, when Dad said that was sinful and wrong, and I spoke at it to him, would you forgive me? Because we're actually training them in the way they should go. Unless we think we're raising sinless children, we're actually teaching them how to walk through life in a redemptive way, where
good.
People will hurt you at different times, people will say things, but we can trust the Lord, and there's always grace when we make mistakes.
Yes, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
Do you have any
Anything
pearls
to
and
add,
wisdom?
I agree with everything you both have.
I cannot believe it. This is so precious.
But I think, and then
there's a but. Hang on.
No. I'm just reiterating what we said.
Okay.
In the context of what we're talking about, in the parents in the church that are generally seeking to love and train their children in the way they should go, I think grace is there. I think if you are living just as an honest, open life, open about your failings, open about where you mess up, going back to your kids, asking forgiveness where needed, I don't think you're going to do irreparable damage. Yes. So I think, I was talking to one mum recently actually who was actually struggling with the condemnation over getting angry with her child like a week before or something, and this, for this particular lady, anger isn't really generally a challenge for her. So she was talking about worrying about how her kids grows up, and is he going to just always remember that one time I got angry with him? And I was like, to be honest, if my kids can, when they're older, well, they are some enough. If they look back and talk about the one time I got angry with them, I would be pretty pleased with myself.
Oh, that's good.
So, but yes, so I think, our sin can do damage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've heard it talked about in terms of our sin can leave shrapnel on the people around us. But I think it's then how do we deal with that?
Yes.
And what it's teaching them, again, as Dave was saying, what do we do when we mess up? Using it to point them to Jesus. That anger that I showed to you right there is the same anger you showed to your brother earlier, and that's why we need Jesus.
Yeah.
So I think
that's a really good illustration of it, because even the shrapnel, because everything about us, I haven't heard you use that illustration before, but as a parent, you say, okay, I want to protect my kids from all shrapnel. Okay, well, so take you out of it as mum and dad. They're still going to get shrapnel from other people. So you're teaching them how to deal with this.
Yes.
The reality we live in a broken world, including mum and dad, and actually son or daughter, including you.
Yeah, that's so
This is why
good.
we need Jesus. It's not an excuse for sin at all. We should try our best not to sin.
Absolutely.
But the reality is we will do things. Or sometimes it might be sinful things. Sometimes they might just be poor decisions.
Yeah.
Decisions we've made. So I can't think of it. But it might be like, okay, we've decided that our kid's going to stay in our bedroom till they're 10. Because I'm fearful about everything. Okay, great. Well, is it right or wrong? It's entirely up to you.
Promise you we are not keeping our kids in their bedroom until they're 10.
No, they moved out in about 10 days. But those sort of things, they're not sinful things. But sometimes I've even heard in that thing, we've got to keep them with us because it will do irreparable harm. You're like, well, I think I've known thousands of people not to do that. So I think having just realising there's lots of different ways of doing some wisdom things. It's up to you.
Yes.
But what we don't want to do is get driven by fear, which is why we're not doing this or why we are doing this. It's like, okay, well, hang on a minute. The Lord shapes us in many different ways.
And that kind of feels like the temperature, the pulse of the world we live in is almost like in all these little issues, you must do this, or this child will be wrecked,
ruined.
And so as parents we go, oh well, I guess yes, I must do that, or I must not do that, and we get pulled in all these different directions. But
Brendan, that's so true. I genuinely, unless the Bible says we must, hold it very, very, very lightly.
Yeah.
And one of the beauties actually of traveling to different countries is you see parenting done very differently under the
Yes.
banner of what we must do. And it seems to be working out fine for them. And they're not doing anything like what we're doing at all in our culture.
Yeah.
So I'd be very careful with must
that's
on
good.
anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what I'm hearing as a common thread is, we're talking about avoiding psychological harm for our kids, but in some ways, even with our best attempts, that's unavoidable.
Yeah.
So the question is less, how can I avoid psychological harm? The question is more, what will I do when I cause it to happen? Where can I turn? And what I'm hearing is, well, we can turn to Christ and His grace, His redemptive power and His presence, and that there's hope for us as parents.
They're the best moments. They're the moments you can take your kids to the gospel.
I want to transition now to talk about really what is fundamentally the name of this podcast, The Imperfect Parent, which is not just in title. No, it's actually profound belief amongst all of us that we are imperfect parents, and because we've got the grace of the Lord Jesus, we can rest in that. So I want to talk a bit more about, okay, where does this meet real life for us? And so I'm interested here. What have been your greatest parenting fails over the years, and maybe even any recent? If you were listening to the first episode we did, our last episode, Michael Scott moments. Michael Scott being that main character from The Office, who's very likable but just makes a meal of it all the time. What are your thoughts on that? Parenting fails.
Well, I've definitely had many. Honestly, it's still amusing to me that Emma and I are doing this podcast because we racked our brains over others that could do it instead. We're doing it because of my role and a desire to serve people.
Yes.
But it is a miracle of grace that our kids are going all right. It's just the Lord's kindness, the Lord's grace, because there's been many failures where you think, oh, I wish I'd had that time over again. I mean, I'm trying to think of even recent ones. I had the famous talk to the hand one. Not that one. I can't remember when
Did we talk about that last time?
Did we? I can't remember.
Maybe. I can't remember.
You tell the story better than me. It was precious.
Oh, I think we were actually on vacation. Aren't they the best time for parenting fails?
Well, that's always the context. Vacation. This is the time we're going to build memories with the kids.
That's it.
We're going to give ourselves.
Oh,
to
we
children.
build memories, all right.
Oh, we build memories. I can't remember. I think Amy or somebody was.
Somebody said I think you were in a bit of a dispute with one of the girls. I think it was, and they were talking to you about something, and you just turned around and said, "Talk to the hand."
I've never said it before.
No. Which I think has caused us all to just
everybody
burst
just
out laughing.
absolutely left their socks off,
actually,
and then the conviction
broke the
of the
atmosphere a little bit in a
Spirit
good
came
way.
in. I was like, oh guys, that was really bad, and probably not talk to the hand. That was sinful. It was wrong. But we've had many failures where you think, oh, trying to be an overbearing parent and then trying to give maybe too much room at other times.
Yeah, that's so hard, isn't it? Just
Get
try
that
to
balance.
to know, was that too much discipline? Was that not enough?
Yes.
Was that over the top?
I think we've done both. I actually think we've done both. I think with one of our kids, I think we disciplined them a bit too much. And then with one of the kids, we didn't discipline them enough.
Yeah.
You're trying to make a call. Because the truth is, I mean, as you already know, all kids are very different, actually.
Yeah.
Even your own kids.
Yes.
They're real different. So you're like, just one size fits all is quite difficult because they behave differently and respond differently to encouragement and or correction.
Yeah, so you think because, it's a second kid, so we've been here before. This is going to be great. We know exactly what we're doing. And then enter the different child, and you just have to start again. And I kind of feel like for us, I think I mentioned on the last podcast that one of the kind of struggles for us has been like one of our kids who we're kind of wondering whether or not he might be neurodiverse on the spectrum sort of thing, and a lot of the things that perhaps we disciplined before as behavior, just realizing I wonder if actually it's not a behavior thing, but he just doesn't seem to understand certain situations that now, because we've got more kids, we can see that everybody else understands, but he doesn't.
Right.
And so knowing, okay, what aspects of that are behavior, and it's like, well, as a dad, I need to be on top of that, and what aspects are just, actually, we just need to be understanding with him and realize that he doesn't get it. I find that hard. I'd say in the season we're in, it's mainly we're the anger phase, so it'd be mainly just
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you talk about the anger phase because maybe it's just me, but I feel like
Still in it?
We've only been in it for 22 years.
Anger is definitely one of my besetting sins. It's definitely something I do have to watch, and I've definitely responded in anger to my kids more than one occasion and way more than I would like to. Actually, to the point where one of my younger ones, actually, when they were about, maybe he was like 4 or 5, I had gotten angry with them, and he turned around and he says to me, "Mum, you need to say, 'Please forgive me for getting angry with you.'" Which I don't recommend saying that to someone when they're angry. But actually it did. I think God did really use that to just pierce the conviction of heart of like, oh yes, I did get angry with you. So yeah, failures in parenting for me, I think anger would definitely be one. I think I always, like, we as a family have never been great at family devotions. We read the Bible for ourselves. We encourage the kids to read the Bible themselves in an age-appropriate way, and we have definitely done things and do things over the time, and we definitely talk a lot. We have a lot of conversations around biblical worldview. We have a lot of conversations about who God is. But if I had my time again, and one thing I'm seeking to do more so with the younger ones is to just actually have those times of making that time to sit down and to read the Bible with them and to help them in that. So I think that's if I look back, that would be definitely one thing. But again, as Dave said, with the odd ones, definitely seen God's faithfulness. Despite our failings in that, he has been faithful.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
And even in the failings, God can be so gracious with it. Like, we're in the thick of that anger phase of parenting for us with, soon to be 4 kids, 5 years of age and under, at home. And Shah was, saying that, she was struggling one day recently with just being angry with the kids. And one of our kids piped up and said to her, "Mum, pray to God."
That's hilarious.
But she was really ministered to by it. She found it hilarious and convicting at the same time of, we've trained you in
and
some
encouraging.
ways.
That's right. It's going in. It's bearing fruit. What do we need to do when we're struggling with anger? We need to pray to God. Like I'd be encouraged.
But
just pray to God.
That's so fun.
Preach it. But, anyway. Well, what I want to do is move on to think about that word grace that we've been talking about. And I reckon as Christians, we use a whole lot of jargon. I reckon grace is one of them. And I just want to throw around just the question, what do we actually mean when we talk about grace? Because I wouldn't want us to, this podcast is all about parents meeting grace, in their imperfections. But I wouldn't want us to just assume that everyone understands what we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
So what would you guys say? If someone's asking you, what is grace? How would you answer that? And perhaps how does it make a difference to our parenting?
Good one.
I'm always going to follow your lead, Dave.
Oh, I tell you. Yeah, grace. The whole premise of grace is getting what we don't deserve.
Yes.
Receiving from the Lord what we don't deserve. We don't deserve His favor, His gladness, His joy, His forgiveness, His adoption. But that's what we receive. It's grace. It's getting in our lives what we don't deserve. And so I think when it comes to parenting, I'd say right off the bat, we don't deserve our children. We deserve to be far away from the Lord, uninterested in the Lord, not bothered about the Lord. And instead, He's entrusted these precious souls to us to train in the way they should go so that by His grace they can mature into adults and worship Him as their Lord and Savior. That's a huge, what a treasure, what a responsibility, and what a grace that we don't deserve. And so I think when it comes to then understanding grace and how it makes a difference to our parenting, it makes a profound difference in a couple of different ways. Number one, there's grace for us as parents.
Yes.
There's no such thing as a perfect parent. And if they tell you they're a perfect parent, they're in trouble. You can just say, "Hey, listen."
One time somebody said,
cheap
"No
brother
parents
doesn't too."
are." Cheap
Yeah.
brother doesn't too. But that's where we get. That's our Bible for parenting. Cheap brother doesn't too.
I was just saying, he's a perfect parent, but a million ways to make a really good one.
Yes, that is one of your favourite lines.
We've watched it quite a lot of times.
We have, but I was more talking about I don't know whether maybe it's somebody when we were in America said no parent is as good as they think they are, no parent is as bad as they think they are. Is that right?
That's good.
Is it all right?
It's probably a bit more effective than
I think
Steve
cheap brother
Martin.
too. I think parents do need to receive grace for themselves.
Yes.
I think one of the lies that Satan gives to you is that you are a terrible parent.
Yes.
I think most dads would probably score themselves a 7 out of 10. Most mums would score themselves a 2 out of 10. They feel like they're terrible. And they're both probably pretty equal, but they feel differently. Mums are very, very diligent. And so I think if you haven't got a grace-motivated mum, they will be overwhelmed with guilt, overwhelmed with shame, overwhelmed with things, because Satan is having a field day.
Yeah.
There's lie after lie after lie. And so first off, grace affects you as a parent when you realize, Lord, I thank you that you forgive me of my sin. I thank you that you accept me.
Yes.
I thank you that you can take my bundled efforts towards my kids and make them new. And work in their lives. And Lord, I thank you that you love my kids more than I do.
Yes.
That you're more involved in my kids' lives than I am. You're greater than I am in what we do. That's all grace. That's all grace, receiving it for yourself. I don't think we can do things unless they're really shocking. But I think that for the vast majority of us who are trying to follow the Lord, there is grace for us as we parent. And if we're trying our best, the Lord will use those faithful efforts, however much they. And then there's grace actually for our kids.
Yes.
We do want to teach our kids grace. We do want to teach them that they are a sinner in need of a Savior, and His name is Jesus. Well, you can never understand that if, as a child, you just think you're rocking through life perfectly. Everything I do is perfect.
Yes.
I'm great. My parents love me unconditionally. Whatever I do, they don't care less. It's just you're not going to learn grace. That's nothing. That's just being walked over. But when they understand that was wrong, but my mum and dad, they forgave me and they helped me, and we're moving on again. You're teaching them grace. You're teaching them about Christ, and grace is huge.
That's true, because I think often when we think about grace, we think about it either that thing that Jesus did on the cross 2,000 years ago, or we can think about it as the ticket to heaven. It's that He made a way,
everything in between.
rather than thinking about how does grace actually change the way we parent. How does it shape the now? And what would you want to add to that, Em?
Yeah, I think as well, I think there's a couple of things. Actually, firstly, just a cool story I just wanted to share after you were talking about listening to the lies of the enemy. And I think I've definitely been in seasons where I've done that. I've listened to the lies, and thinking about the things I've said that I shouldn't have said, I haven't done what I should have done. And I think it was maybe last year sometime I was really struggling with some guilt and condemnation just over time. So I've gotten angry or whatever, and struggling to get past that. And I was thinking, has this caused irreparable damage? I can't say that then.
It's a mouthful.
To our kids. It is. Yeah, I won't be saying that again. And I remember talking to you about it, and you were trying to speak truth to me, and it was, I could hear it, but I think I still didn't quite believe it. And then actually God just really used a friend who doesn't even live in this country, knew nothing of the situation. And I was just talking to her, like she lives in America, and I was just having a phone call with her, which I did, I don't know, every couple of months or so. And she said, I was just praying for you the other day, and it's really random, but I just felt like God said to me, He wanted me to say to you, He is pleased with your mothering. And I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so random to you, but it's so relevant to me because
I think she said that to you, didn't she?
She did. She said, this is random. She was almost a bit apologetic, like, I don't know if this is
going to be weird.
You're going to become a Fruit Loop here. But it was so meaningful, and grateful to her for sharing it, but just grateful that God would take that time to, I'm one little person in the whole universe, yet He saw the struggle I was having in my thoughts, the condemnation. He took that time to speak to a friend, to speak to me, to encourage me. And that really helped. But I think the other part of grace that I think we can forget, like we can talk about past grace and future grace, but I think also just sustaining grace. And I think that's something I've been reminded of over the last 6 months, and definitely through different challenges we've had in parenting, particularly with our foster kids, but also it happens with biological kids too. And it was actually a message CJ Mahane preached last year at the Parties Conference, and just like, we're having a tough time, and sometimes I feel like, can we go on? And then I think he just helped me realize God is sustaining us. We're still here.
Yes.
We're still standing. We might be slightly wounded and limping, but we are still standing, and God is sustaining us. So I found that just really encouraging, just to think about each grace for each day.
Doesn't that I really resonate with what you're saying, Em? Doesn't that speak to our intuition? Like when we talk about grace, I'm praying that God would give me grace. Often we can be meaning by that, I'm praying that God would take it away.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
That's not necessarily
make
grace.
It easy.
Might be. But I think something that Paul Tripp points out really helpfully is that actually God's main project of grace in your life is to make you like Christ.
Yes.
And so when we feel that way and we say, God, give me grace, so often he's saying, yes and amen, I'm giving you grace. It's just uncomfortable grace.
Yes.
Because my project's not to make you comfortable, it's to transform you to be like Christ.
Yes.
And just that awareness that you were just beautifully sharing, that you realize, we have been recipients of God's grace in this real hardship we're going through, that God has been upholding us and purifying us in and through it. But we don't naturally think that way.
No.
It's so true. I think sometimes we use the word grace, and we should, because it is the way the Bible uses it. But what we're actually talking about is not just his undeserved favour. It's like his undeserved help, or his undeserved assistance, or his undeserved empowering presence.
Yes.
God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. What does that mean? Just takes everything away? No, he gives you undeserved help.
Yes.
And assistance in what you're walking through. And I think the vast majority of times when we're hearing grace talked about in the Bible, it is talking about sustaining grace. It's talking about, I will help you. I'll never leave you or forsake you. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. It's that.
Yes.
It's giving,
and of course, the greatest help he can do in our lives is to make us like his son.
Absolutely.
To transform us, to trust him like his son trusted him, to be kind to others like his son was kind. And
I actually think it's partly why, and maybe we won't get into it much in this episode, it's partly why God has given you exactly the children that you have. Those specific children. Because he's going to use you in their lives, and he's going to use them in yours, in your process of becoming more like his son. He's going to use them very specifically in your life.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it?
Yeah. And a process of just helping us to depend on him more and more
that's what happens.
So I think the longer I've been a parent, the less qualified I feel to be a parent. And again, just I think a helpful picture and story that God brought to mind again when I was feeling a bit like, I can't go forward, I don't know what to do, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And it was just the picture of when Peter got out of the boat to walk towards Jesus and would take a step forward, and then he just started to panic, and he started to sink, and Jesus said, come to me. And I felt like God was saying to me, you just need to keep stepping forward, and you just need to keep your eyes focused on me, and not on the challenges and not what could go wrong. And that makes me feel nervous, because I'm like, that doesn't mean everything's going to go well. That doesn't mean everything's going to end the way I want it to. But what it does mean, no, God is in this, and I need to depend on him, and I just need to keep my eyes fixed on him, and I just need to keep putting that one foot forward in front of the other onto that water, which is not stable ground. I feel like I sink any minute, but I think just living in that, it just helps us be dependent on God for the strength we need for each day. He doesn't call us to a task that he doesn't give us the grace to do. And if he's given us the kids, even if you didn't plan your kids, which some people might not have, but God has, So I think, and he will give you the grace to deal and to train those kids and to love those kids.
Yeah. Amen. I can see when it's hard, the temptation to either look across the paddock, to the person next door and go, why didn't you give me, kids like that? Or to think there's been a horrible mistake here. This is somehow, this is a mistake, but to recognize that, like what you're saying, that step of faith, to say, no, God knew exactly what he was doing. When he gave us these kids. It's not an accident. It's his plan from the beginning of time, and to receive them as such, as a gift from him.
I think particularly parenting as well, Brent, because I think for us in Sydney, we're in a very young professional environment.
Yes.
And so on the whole, you're like, well, young professional, so I'll train hard and then I'll work hard and I'll be good at it. I can cope with it and I can control it because I'm the boss, or I'm doing this, or this is what I'm qualified for. And then kids come into your life. They're just they're not as easy as that.
Yes.
It's just totally different. They don't respect you in the way maybe your people you work with do. It's just a very different thing. And I think the Lord uses that to press buttons in our life that isn't going to be touched on in any other way. I think it might be why we get overwhelmed with it and think, I don't think I have the grace for this.
Yes.
Or what you actually just mean, this is very hard, and I don't think I like this. I'd like somebody else to do it.
Yes.
But actually, you do have the grace for it. You're just finding it hard.
That's so well put, isn't it? When it gets hard, we can say, I do not have the grace. But what are we assuming that the grace is there for?
Well, that sounds quite biblical, doesn't it? I don't have the grace. God's not giving me the grace for this, therefore I must just opt out.
Yes, I think what's happened is the God that opened the Red Sea is not helping me in this, so I must have made a mistake. Or, well, there's no mistake. If that kid calls you mum and dad, they're yours. It's exactly the way it was meant to be.
Yes.
He's just got you backed up against the Red Sea. You need his help.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
I think in some ways, isn't it? It's just how our culture just influences the way we think about God and everything. We look at God, intuitively think, God must exist to help my life be pleasant, comfortable,
smoothly.
Easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
just to almost be my therapist, to help make it comfortable. And so when something's going seemingly wrong and it's hard and it's difficult and it's messy, we go, well, I need grace to get out of this.
Yeah.
So it must be wrong, rather than the lens of faith, which I hear you guys sharing so beautifully with that illustration about the stepping out onto the water. And it was so good. But no, eyes fixed on Jesus. I don't understand this is crazy, but what I do know is God is at work transforming me to be like Christ. He's going to sustain me. He's going to be with me. This is his perfect plan. I'm going to receive it as such.
Yeah.
So
Which is hard. It is hard.
Oh,
there are
it
times
is.
when you're just like, man,
Yeah.
I'm going to pull my hair out. It is hard. And often when you're pulling your hair out, it's not necessarily the kid per se. It's you. It's how you're reacting to it. It's just so difficult. But that's often when God's doing his biggest work in your life.
Yeah, that's awesome, guys. Lots for Charlotte and I to look forward to in the future. We're at nappies and
Stick with them for now.
packing lunch boxes for
That's
preschool kind of phase.
No,
So-
we're at the old enough to make their own lunch
Yeah,
boxes.
that's right. That's right. And nappies, we just stopped on that last week with some of our older ones.
Well, keeping on that line of thinking, I mean, we're talking about grace as transforming grace. We've been talking about imperfections and not being fearful, and how God takes even the hard things or the things that we mess up and transforms them into something beautiful. I mean, where have we seen that? Where have we seen God take something that was actually maybe a genuine failing of ours and transform it into something that's beautiful?
Well, for me, I think of it like what I was saying before. I think some of my most precious parenting moments probably are the failures. It's not like I'm going looking for them. It's not like it's, let's fail because this will be a sweet moment. No, you fail and it's painful and you wish you hadn't. But God redeems it a couple of different ways. I think, like I spoke about before, it's certainly a moment to share the gospel. And to model yourself how to deal with sin and repentance. So for all of our kids, actually, even our younger ones, it wouldn't be unusual for them to say, would you forgive me? Because they've heard it off us many times. In fact, my youngest heard it just the other day about something I'd said. And I said, look, would you forgive me for that? Oh, yeah, I will. And actually, would you forgive me for what I said in response?
Wow, that's beautiful.
So so you're teaching brackets of understanding, which is really helpful. The other thing that I've found really helpful through parenting failures, which I suppose isn't just parenting failures, but being able to relate to the kids' weaknesses and model their own way of Christ. So it might be a parenting failure, as in they're definitely not responding to what you're saying. Or if they're getting older, you're watching them about to tread into a path of foolishness, which can do their harm. But the Lord uses you in the equation to help them realize, hey, actually, I can see what you're about to do, and I get it, because when I was your age, I would have done exactly the same thing. That would have been me. And I've realized through this how much like me you actually are. But don't do that, because this is what happened to me. This is my story. And they're really precious moments, I think. You watch your kids' eyes light up a little bit, like, I am like my parents, and they can relate. And what you're actually doing is showing them Christ. You're teaching them Christ. Every time. That's the most precious thing, isn't it? Leading
beautiful.
your kids to the Lord. And that'd be me. What about you, love?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think the biggest thing is
me
just
a lot
the.
today.
I know. It's good, isn't it? So well.
I'm going to play this recording.
I was
back.
nervous when we started. I was like, oh gosh, first line we're disagreeing. That's not great. But no, I do. I just think that practice of going back and having to ask forgiveness for our kids has been good. Is good for ourselves, because we're humbling ourselves and admitting to our kids. No,
to give just clarity on that as well, we did that pretty much from when they could talk.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about when they're older. When they're talking and we make mistakes, like, would you forgive me? They learned it very young that we make mistakes.
Yeah.
Which has been good.
It has been good. I think it's given us some, good gospel opportunities for conversation in just terms of why we need Jesus, why they need Jesus, and pointing to Jesus. I think it's also, God's been really faithful to us, particularly with our older ones and the ages that, just in helping develop that friendship and that relationship with them, which is one of the things I really treasure most about about being a mum is that relationship that we've developed as they've gotten older, and that there is a genuine friendship there. And I think it's because, as you said, I think they can relate to us. They know that we're just like them. We've never pretended to them that we've been the perfect parents. They're very aware of our failings and our weaknesses, but I think they're also very aware of that we need Jesus. And I think it's been good to see as well just God's faithfulness in parenting, because it makes me more amazed at who God is, because I'm very aware of a lot of ways I've messed up our parenting, and I'm sure there's a whole heap more of ways I've messed up that I'm not aware of, but good just seeing God's faithfulness to our kids in their lives. I mean, his grace is bigger than our sin. So, I think just seeing him transform that has been super encouraging.
That's so good, guys. I mean, we believe a gospel of grace, right? We believe that God extends forgiveness that's undeserved to us through Jesus. And yet, as parents, it's not our instinct, is it, to confess our sin to anyone, and to ask for a child's forgiveness. And yet I think that can be so beautiful. And I know lots of times, for us, where obviously the big thing we're confessing often is daddy shouldn't have got angry at you like that, and yet it's so beautiful to watch them learn and see how we were just once exactly the same. I was recently sharing with Zachy a story of how I did something very similar to what he did, because I took my little tin lawnmower that I used to follow my dad around mowing the lawns with all the time, and he said, don't touch this new tree I've planted, and I smashed down the tree with my lawnmower and destroyed his
little
and it was just so beautiful to be able to share that story with him and say, hey, I was just like you, and God's been gracious to me. The downside is, because he's so little, he brings up the story all the time, but
don't credit me for that, Dad. You were just
smash down the tree.
That's right.
Yes, but don't you smash down the tree.
That's right.
As we kind of get towards the end of this episode, I just want us to kind of park out a little bit more on this topic of grace, and just thinking about the doctrine of salvation by grace alone. This idea that we did nothing to merit God's favor, but that he chose us, apart from any good thing we've done. He chose us before he even made the world to know him and love him. One of the beautiful truths, thinking about Ephesians 2, and it says, you were dead, and then those famous lines, but God, who rescued us. And what difference should that make to a parent who's struggling? Just by way of context, I was chatting to a dad recently, and he's got kids that are grown up, and he was sort of sharing how he really feels that he has stuffed up his kids. His kids are now older, they're not walking with Christ, and he feels personally like this is his fault. So we can have some real significant failures in life and wrestle with a lot of guilt. How does this truth affect us then as parents to live in light of it?
Yeah, that's so good. Well, if we really believe we're saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and if we really do sing from life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands our destiny, then what you have to deduce from all of the above is the salvation is not dependent upon you one little bit.
Yeah.
It's not you.
Yes.
It's not you. So you could have been the world's worst parent, and your kids, within maybe even the damage that has been caused by you, take it outside of ourselves to somebody else, they find Christ.
Yes.
Or you were the perfect parent. You did everything right. You brought them to church all the time. They've learned all the Bible verses and all that, and the lights just don't come on.
Yeah.
So I think it cuts both ways. In one sense, if our kids do well and they start loving the Lord, you can't look on and go, well, that was me.
Yeah.
Didn't I do well? I've led them straight to Christ.
Yeah.
It's saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ
alone,
and me.
Podcast.
And me. Yeah, that's right. So let's not be rather. If they are saved, then it is despite you.
Yes.
God in his mercy and his kindness, no matter what you did. And so I think it really takes it off the table. Yes. You realize it's a different path. It's a different thing we're talking about here. And whatever anybody pushback is, it's just bigger than that. Because if somebody says, but what if you're a hypocrite? That probably damages the kids too much. Or if you're abusive, and that probably damages the kids too much. Or if you let them stay awake too late, so they watch unpleasant things on TV.
Yes.
Okay, hang on. So what we're saying is, God saves before the foundation of the earth, but unfortunately, because of your parenting, he couldn't quite cut through that.
Yes.
That's just not realistic.
Yes.
God is gracious and can cut through any sin,
Yes.
open any eyes. The reality is, we are parenting though kids that are dead. They are the walking dead in their faith at this point in time, until the Lord opens their eyes, which is why the best thing we can do, which was I think we talked about last time, in it all, we want to parent as well as we can. We want to show them Christ. We want to bring them to the field, bring them to the church, all the above. We got to pray for our kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Lord, because it's a miracle.
Yes.
If they get saved, it's a miracle. And so prayer is so important. But I think we can take the pressure off of, I've got to save my kids. You cannot save your kids. You can keep pointing in the right direction, keep showing them where to dig for the treasure, all the above. You should do all those things, but you can't save them. It's going to require a miracle.
No, that's
So
right.
good.
And I think we can be signposts to Jesus, and we can be stumbling blocks. And I think we're probably both in
Yes.
the whole of life,
Different
all of
times,
us at different times. But yeah, as you say, Dave, we cannot save our kids. And I think what difference does the doctrine of salvation of grace alone make to the way we view our failures? I think let it make the gospel shine brighter,
Yes.
and let it make God become bigger. Because
Yes.
despite your failures, He has saved you,
Yeah.
and you are redeemed, and you are forgiven. They're not future tenses, but they are the way we are now. They are the way God views us, and His grace is there for us and for our kids. And like you said, Dave, I think we've seen it. We've seen parents that have really messed up.
Yeah.
And to the point of their parenting has at different points been abusive. And their kids have turned out to love Jesus. As some of the most passionate people I know have not seemingly lived with the scars of that.
Yes.
And we know parents who have seemingly ticked all the right boxes and done all that they can for their kids, and they're not loving Jesus at this point in time. So I think it's just, that's right. It's not about what we do. Yes, we can be a signpost. Yes, we do want to do that. Yes, we can be a stumbling blocks. We want to try and avoid that, but it's not about us at the end of the day.
It's so true. Yeah, there are dangers, just as an aside, on both sides of the coin. Because on the one hand, we obviously don't want to be living sinful lives towards our kids, obviously. But you can fall off the horse the other way as well, where you're like, I'm going to do 17 memory verses a day with my kids. I'm going to have 3 quiet times. I'm going to do all this. And the problem is, we can be driving it, thinking, if I do this, this is how they'll find Christ.
It can be fear-driven in itself,
maybe not. That might not work out like that. And so we in some ways, you've got to cut both away and go, my only hope is that Christ opens their eyes.
Yes, that's so good. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I love, and I've said this before, but I love that picture that Tim Keller has on how we should think about this. You know, and that he takes the picture of Elijah and the prophets of Baal and says, you know, how Elijah stacked all that timber up against the altar, but ultimately it has to be the Lord who brings the flame. You know, we can, as parents, we should be trying to stack wood on that altar, kindling, putting it around our kids, and I guess that's what our efforts can achieve, is kindling. But without that prayerful disposition, asking the Lord to work, without His intervention and the miracle of grace alone, you know, all our efforts are naught. It's only the Lord who can set the heart of a child on fire.
Amen.
Well, as we kind of wrap up our time, because I'm mindful of time, we've kind of come right to the end. But I just want us to give it just a last.
These people have got to be at work by now. Their commute's got to have finished.
They should be. I mean, you know, we're probably just talking to one person here. It's probably.
Hello, Mum.
You made it this far. Well done. You must love your son. I've just got it on my heart and in my mind, that parent who's really wrestling with failure.
Yeah.
And they're feeling guilty. They're aware that they're imperfect and they've been failing over and over again. A last bit of advice to that parent. How would we want to encourage them as we finish up? And what would you say to that mum?
I think in terms of their own guilt and personal failures, definitely a verse that helps me is Romans 8:1, where it says, "There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." And just that word, no condemnation.
Yes.
Not just like a little bit, well, if you mess up, obviously you're going to carry the guilt of that. It's like, no, Jesus paid the price for that. And to be honest, if we're carrying guilt and living with guilt and condemnation, then what we're saying is that Jesus' death wasn't enough for that. So just going back to the gospel and reminding ourselves of the truth of the forgiveness we have for the times that we mess up, and for the kids' future, it's trusting God, like we said, that His grace is way bigger than our sin. So, and He loves our kids even more than we do. So, and He's at work
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's probably, like any every other relationship, if we realise we're failing in some areas, well then seek to rectify that. So that starts upward, asking the Lord for forgiveness.
Yes.
And where we've messed up or continue to mess up with what He's entrusted to our care.
Yes.
So we want forgiveness from the Lord, which we'll receive. And then we probably need to get right with our kids sometimes as well by asking them for forgiveness. You know, I've been getting too angry with you, or I don't know, whatever it be, whatever the situation be, asking for their forgiveness. That was wrong when Dad was speaking like that or saying that type of stuff. Or I've been being unkind, and would you forgive me for that? In fact, would you pray with me?
Yes.
And even if they're 3 years old, great, they'll just pray with them because you're teaching them something. But you're also building your relationship with them, which, you know, as you go into those teens years, you're going to really need and you're going to really want. And so they're starting to trust you even now when they're young. That my dad doesn't live his life as if to say, hey, come up here all the time, come and be with me, I'm perfect. My dad comes alongside me.
Yes.
So he's an authority in my life, and he's definitely my father, but he's also a brother when I'm making mistakes. And
that's good.
it's putting in the groundwork for all those things. And so I don't think failures are sometimes the catastrophe that we think they are. I think they can be an incredible means of grace.
That's good.
To help build relationally with a kid and also show them Christ.
And I think even if your kids are 30, you can do that.
Absolutely.
Even if you feel like I've
Never too
completely
late.
messed up your childhood.
Yes.
I did not point you to Jesus in the way I should.
Go tell
Maybe we got distracted with other things as a family. I think just going
tell
back to
them.
your kids,
Yeah.
even as grown
Would you
adults,
forgive me?
Yes.
I made a
and talking
mistake.
to them about that and asking their forgiveness in that. Like, God can really use that. It's never too late.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think there'd be something really powerful about that, wouldn't it? If a
absolutely.
parent came back to you many years later and asked your forgiveness. No agenda, just
Massive.
hey, what I did was wrong. Would you forgive me?
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys, for your amazing counsel on this episode and the privilege of being together in a community where we're all imperfect together, looking to Christ for His grace.
We're all having a go.
We're all having a go. And isn't that a beautiful thing? And I guess what I'm hearing is a take-home message in dealing with failure, as we've been talking about, is to lean into it, actually, to see it, not to see it as something we need to be terrified of, that somehow we're going to mess up our kids, but actually something that even God can use to bring more glory to Himself as we live out the truths of the gospel together as a community. And so, you know, if that's you're really struggling in our church community, this is a podcast for parents primarily in our church community. Lean into the community. You know, share that with a trusted friend. Share that with someone in your gospel community. Share that with one of us, you know, on the pastoral team, and experience the beautiful gift of being part of the family of God. Well, guys, thanks for making it this far. Just to flag, next episode, we're going to dive into a hot topic. We'll see. You know,
there we go.
If it is, in fact, just Dave's mum listening, maybe we'll call it a day. But we're hoping to record another episode called Career versus Kids, a Balance to be Mastered, or Worldliness in the Church. So we're going to tackle that hot topic. And don't forget, if you're listening online, subscribe and leave us a review. That'll really help others in our church and beyond us even to find us online. You've been listening to the Imperfect Parent Podcast, Gospel Hope for Imperfect Parents, and we're looking forward to hearing again or chatting again, continuing the conversation with you guys soon. God bless you.